Today I'm telling you the extraordinary story of a man whose sense of duty and loyalty led him to carry on fighting a war long after it had ended. Hiroo Onoda, born in 1922 in Kamikawa Village, Wakayama Prefecture, Japan, Onoda entered military life trained for one thing above all: obedience and service to his country. He served as a second lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army, deployed to the Philippine island of Lubang in April 1944. His mission: to conduct guerrilla warfare if the Allies invaded, to hold out and only surrender when ordered to do so by his commanding officer. What follows is a tale of duty turned into decades-long isolation, of jungle survival, of loyalty that outlasted the war itself, and ultimately of a man returning to a homeland he scarcely recognized. In early 1944, Japan's military situation was deteriorating. The Philippines campaign was underway and Allied forces were advancing. Onoda landed on Lubang Island with his unit. His orders were precise: resist an invasion, conduct guerrilla operations, hold the island, and do not surrender under any circumstances unless officially ordered to do so by his superior officer. The island itself offered dense jungle, rugged terrain, and a populace now caught between two worlds: the older wartime Japan and the new post-war reality. For Onoda, however, there would be no transition for many years. In August 1945, Japan announced its surrender following atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the official end of World War II. Yet Onoda and his small group of holdout soldiers did not accept the news. They believed that this was enemy propaganda or a ruse and remained hidden in the jungle. For Onoda and his comrades, life on Lubang Island after 1945 became an extreme exercise in survival and still active combat readiness. They built shelters from bamboo, lived off wild fruits, game, stolen rice, and whatever supplies they could salvage. Their uniforms gradually wore down, their world shrank to the jungle, yet for Onoda his duty remained crystal clear. Wait for orders, keep fighting, hold the line. Leaflets were dropped, letters sent, even family photographs broadcasted and distributed to encourage surrender. The Japanese government and the Philippine authorities made repeated efforts to convince them the war was over. Onoda refused to believe these. He believed that such communications were enemy trickery, that his commanding officer would return, and until then his orders remained valid. Over the years, his group shrank. One soldier surrendered in 1950. Two others died, one in 1954 and one in 1972. Onoda remained alone or nearly alone in the jungle. In this long isolation, the jungle was both friend and foe. On one hand, it protected him. On the other, it isolated him, turned him into a soldier frozen in time while the world changed. During his decades in hiding, Onoda was not merely sleeping or lost. He carried out genuine guerrilla operations, engaged in firefights, stole supplies, and sometimes clashed with local police or civilians. Indeed, some of these actions led to tragic consequences for villagers and farmers. These aspects complicate the mythologizing of his story. Yet for Onoda, these were part of his mission. He believed he was still at war, still serving his country. His mindset remained frozen in 1944 to 45, even as the world marched on, living on essentially decades-old orders. He survived by resourcefulness, fishing, setting snares, raiding rice fields, avoiding patrols. He constantly moved, hid, and remained vigilant. His rifle, ammunition, hand grenades were maintained. At the same time, search parties came and went. The Philippine government and others declared some of the holdouts dead or missing. Onoda and his few remaining comrades simply refused to believe it. Eventually, only Onoda remained. In 1974, nearly 29 years after Japan's official surrender, Onoda was discovered by a Japanese explorer, Norio Suzuki. Suzuki found Onoda on Lubang Island in February of that year. Onoda, initially ready to fire on Suzuki, finally agreed to meet with him, but only if his former commanding officer would issue the official orders to stand down. He maintained that he could not surrender unless the chain of command formally relieved him of duty. Suzuki returned to Japan, found Onoda's former commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, flew him to Lubang, and on 9th March 1974, read the order formally relieving Onoda of his duties. On the next day, 10th March 1974, Onoda surrendered. Onoda handed over his Arisaka Type 99 rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and the dagger his mother had given him to kill himself if he were ever captured. When he returned to Japan, he received a hero's welcome, though his experience of isolation left him changed, and Japanese society had changed too. After his surrender, Onoda published his autobiography, No Surrender, My 30-Year War, 1974. He later moved to Brazil, became a cattle rancher before returning to Japan. He passed away on the 16th of January 2014 at age 91. His story raises multiple questions about duty, about obedience, about what constitutes surrender, and about the cost of isolation. Onoda himself asked, "What had I been doing all these years? Had the war really ended?" In popular media, his story inspired the 2021 French film Onoda, 10,000 Nights in the Jungle. What can we learn from Hiroo Onoda's story? A soldier's dedication can become profoundly literal and to the point of anchoring a lifetime of action in a world that has moved on. War leaves traces long after ceasefires and treaties. To Onoda, the embassy announcements, the newspapers, the leaflets, none were as credible as the orders he'd received. Survival under such conditions demands both physical endurance and mental resilience, but also raises ethical and moral questions about what was done in the name of duty. Ultimately, returning to civilian life after decades of war mode is hard, and for Onoda the homecoming was bittersweet. When Onoda finally walked out of the jungle, he left behind a man stuck in time, but he also carried forward something: the discipline of survival, the memory of friends lost, the burden of what it all meant. His surrender was less a triumphant return and more a quiet decision to stop fighting when he finally could. Hiroo Onoda, a soldier who kept fighting for nearly 29 years after the war ended, because his orders said to hold the line, and because in his mind the war had never ended. His journey took him from the fields of Wakayama to the jungles of Lubang, to international headlines and back home. But the end of Hiroo Onoda's war did not mean the end of his struggle. For nearly 3 decades, his identity had been built on the principles of discipline, secrecy, and loyalty to an empire that no longer existed. When he stepped off that plane in Tokyo in 1974, the flags and flashbulbs greeted him not as a soldier returning from battle, but as a relic of another time, a man out of place in the modern world. Japan itself had changed beyond recognition. Neon lights, Western fashions, economic growth, television. The once militarized nation had become one of peace and prosperity. To Onoda, this was disorienting. He had left a country at war and returned to a nation that had abandoned the ideals he had once sworn to protect. Many celebrated him as a hero of loyalty. Others questioned the consequences of his long resistance, the loss of life that occurred during those decades of mistaken combat. Onoda faced both admiration and criticism, and he handled both with a calm, stoic grace. He often said that he had simply done his duty, nothing more, nothing less. Yet there was a deeper layer beneath that composure. For 29 years he had lived with a single purpose. Without that purpose, the world seemed empty. The jungle had been harsh, but it had also been simple. There, everything had meaning. Every sound, every rustle of the trees, every distant movement could be a threat, a clue, or a test. Civilization, by comparison, felt strangely meaningless. In interviews, he described how difficult it was to adjust to ordinary life. "In the jungle," he once said, "I never doubted what I had to do. Back here, I find myself wondering why." He could sleep in a bed again, wear clean clothes, and eat proper meals. But mentally, part of him was still listening for distant footsteps, still guarding the perimeter of a forgotten war. In the years that followed, Onoda sought peace in new ways. He accepted a quiet life in Brazil where he ran a cattle ranch. It was a place of open land and endless horizon, not unlike the jungle in its solitude but without the fear. He married, built friendships, and lived away from the spotlight. Occasionally, he returned to Japan for public speaking, often encouraging young people to find purpose in their lives, to build discipline, but also to think for themselves, something he admitted he had not done when he was young. He later established a nature school for children, teaching them resilience and self-reliance. In many ways, this was his attempt to pass on the endurance he had learned, but this time in the service of peace rather than war. For Onoda, honor was not a word. It was the foundation of his being. Yet, as he grew older, he recognized that blind obedience without question can be as dangerous as cowardice. He spoke openly about how easy it is for people to lose themselves in orders, in ideology, in the certainty that they are right. It's not loyalty alone that makes a man honorable, he once reflected. It's the ability to see truth even when it contradicts what you've been told. That realization came late, but it gave his story its lasting power. It turned him from a symbol of war into a lesson about humanity. When Hiroo Onoda passed away in 2014 at the age of 91, he left behind a complex legacy, one that cannot be neatly summarized as heroic or tragic. He was both. A man shaped by his time and at the same time trapped by it. His life became a mirror reflecting the costs of devotion and the difficulty of letting go. For some, his name stands for extraordinary courage. For others, it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute obedience. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between, in the human struggle to give meaning to one's duty and to find peace once that duty ends. In the end, Onoda's story is not just about a soldier, it is about the passage of time, about how belief can outlast reality, and how the human spirit can endure even the loneliest of wars. He survived 29 years in the jungle, but the real victory was not survival itself. It was the strength to finally lay down his rifle, look at the world as it truly was, and accept that the war was over that moment. Quiet, human, and humble may have been his greatest act of courage. As the sun finally set over Lubang Island, Hiroo Onoda's war came to an end, not in a blaze of gunfire but in silence, a silence almost sacred, filled with the echoes of nearly 3 decades spent chasing an enemy that no longer existed. He had entered the jungle, a soldier, but he emerged as something else, a reminder of how powerful belief can be and how fragile the line is between purpose and obsession. In his eyes, duty was eternal. In the eyes of the world, his story became a legend. Onoda's life asks us a question that lingers long after the last page of history is turned. When does loyalty become blindness? And when does surrender become the only act of true strength? Today, the jungles of Lubang are quiet. But somewhere beneath the canopy and the years, the ghost of a man still stands guard, waiting for orders that will never come. Not out of madness, not out of fear, but out of a promise he made long ago to never give up no matter how long the war would last. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it lets us keep bringing you stories like this one. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and never stop learning.